Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. I'd first like to acknowledge that we are based here in Vancouver, and we are gathered on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. For those of you who are joining from outside of Vancouver, we do invite you to take a moment to reflect on the territories that you are located on, and feel free to share in the chat box where you might be joining us from this evening. Picking up on the title of our talk, this year has certainly been a time like no other, and certainly our communities continue to face very difficult and unprecedented challenges. So we do think it's a special moment to gather here with you this evening to take stock and reflect on not only the challenges that have unfolded in Chinatown over the past year, but what really stood out for us are the connections and the bonds that were formed and can really help us pull through and move forward together in much stronger ways than we ever imagined before. And so we're very eager to see the presentation and photo retrospective that Larry has put together, but we're also fortunate to be able to have a conversation afterwards with our guests, Olivia from Treasure Green Tea, and fortunately, Austin Liu from Embers did have a last minute emergency, so he does send his regrets, but he will not be able to join us, but does wish he could be here. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers. I myself, my name is Sarah Ling, and I'm the current president of the Chinese Canadian Historical Society. But we will be joined by Larry Chin, who is presenting his photo retrospective. Larry's on our board of directors, but I'll just share a bit more background for those of you who have yet to be introduced to his work. But Larry has been an active volunteer in Chinatown for various cultural initiatives. He's an avid photographer in the neighborhood and enjoys capturing landscape architecture and candid photography. And he's also a member of the Hakka Association. But Larry was born in Malaysia and immigrated to Fort McMurray in Alberta originally before coming to Vancouver. And we're also very fortunate to have our panel following Larry's presentation moderated by our Vice President, John Atkin, who, as many of you know, is a very well-versed civic historian and author who conducts many walking tours around the city and the province. And John is also currently the president of the Dr. Sun Yat-sen Classical Chinese Garden, who we often partner with. And following the talk, John will be introducing Olivia Chen, who we see here joining us from Treasure Green Tea. So I will now ask Larry to present his show. During this portion, we would ask you to keep your video and audio off, and there will be an opportunity to join the conversation afterwards. So over to you, Larry.
Thanks very much, Sarah, for the wonderful introduction. It's an Hi, everybody. I'm just going to repeat what I said. I think I automatically, the mute came on. Good evening, and it's an honor to be here this evening. And I thank you very much for spending time with us this evening to join us for this retrospective. Without further ado, I'm going to start.
Larry, you're going to need to speak a little bit louder, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just going to get a little bit closer to my laptop. So can you hear me okay, better?
Yes.
Okay, good. In early spring of 2020, which is nearly a year ago, Chinese Canadian Historical Society, led by John Price, who's now a retired board member, and Sarah Ling, the current president, as you have met earlier, approached me to assist with gathering emergency supplies to the Muchalat First Nation. It's a remote community off on the west coast of Vancouver Island. If you don't know where that is, it's roughly, it's north of Ucluelet and Tofino, to give you some idea of where that city is, or the township. So a bit of background. A few years ago, CCHS helped celebrate a much lesser known part of BC's Trans-Pacific history at the Summer Festival, hosted by the nation. CCHS honored the 230th anniversary, and I'll repeat, 230th anniversary of a journey made by the Mawachat chief Komekela to China back in 1887. And the brother of Chief Maquena, who returned to Yuquat a year later with dozens of Chinese craftsmen and many other migrants. So that gives you a bit of a background in terms of the connection that CCH has with the community that's with the First Nation. So here is an image back last spring. It was my last visit to Chinatown was on March the 7th. And upon the health orders, by about April 20th is when we began to start gathering the supplies that we wanted to from Chinatown. And we sourced a lot of supplies to the nation and purchased a lot of the items from Chinatown. Just to give you an idea, there were roughly about 60 pounds of lapchang, or Chinese sausage. That equates to about 70 packs. And 80 pounds of chashu, or barbecue pork, and about 180 pounds of lemons that we loaded on the back of my truck, as you can see here. That's on Gore Street. And eventually there were more supplies that were gathered by other members and other members of the society to help. And you see Wendy there with the back of her vehicle with lots of soy sauce. And but ultimately, these all made it to the nation. You'll see a picture of John Price at the bottom left-hand corner, him delivering all these goods and supplies to the nation. And so that said, this is really a bit of a background in terms of how this virtual show came to be. Having seen Chinatown during the early phases of this health order, as well as processing my own experience and emotions through this pandemic, an idea was born. And this is a notepad of some of the scratches that I made back in June of last year, where I was, going through the emotional wheel and trying to capture this. And from that, with the encouragement of Sarah and Joyce, who's our secretary and treasurer of CCHS, they are the two people that really encouraged me to document this. And at some point later on, do a retrospective. And here we are. Now, to give you an idea, it's a long time frame since last year. I wanted to put some perspective, at least from a time standpoint, of when a lot of these images were captured. As you can see here, the phase 1 and 2 was with the early stages of the pandemic, where everything, the health order, I wouldn't say a lockdown, but we were very, very much isolated. And the time that I had taken pictures were around the April to June timeframe. So it didn't cover phase 3 of the restart plan. Is really in that time frame. I would say a very small slice of time, which we have called this presentation a time like no other, that I don't think we'll experience anytime soon, and hopefully not. That said, I think this will give you some perspective of the small, short time frame that we took these images. So having said that, for the earliest phases that we have, there was a lot of confusion, our inability to gather. A lot of things that we were used to were removed from us. So this resulted in a lot of isolation for most of us. And in some cases, that isolation led to fear. So back in around May, I wanted to share with you an image of the Historical Society's headquarters. We were based in Chinatown House. And for those that are not familiar with this space, it is fairly close to Newtown. It's just up the hill from Newtown. But I wanted to show you an image of what the office looked like around May at that time. As you can see, it's fairly open. However, with the health order and security measures, a lot of boards were put up. And to the right, you will see that the only access to this space was through this tiny hole where you're able to, if you had access to unlock to go in the building, and looking out the hole, you see the Ma building somewhat across from the from Chinatown House. So CCHS was based in Chinatown House, and Chinatown House is a community-driven initiative to conserve Chinatown's creative culture and heritage. It is a shared co-working and community space for a collective of various organizations and individuals. So CCHS holds their board meetings there. So it was a space that was utilized by the group to hold meetings, to gather, and not being able to do that was somewhat isolating. And here is a view of Chinatown House from the inside out. Typically, this is an open space, but because it was boarded up, if you saw the image earlier, you see what it looked like through the tiny hole there through that door. This is in the alcove and entrance space. And you will see two doors there. One of those doors belonged to a watch repair shop that's located just on the outside of the building, but the only way they can access it is through those doors and through the boarded up doors as well. So this is an example of some of the spaces that have been isolated due to the health order. And for those that are not familiar with this image, I have been to the Flota restaurant for quite a number of years. And this is the first time I've actually seen these gates. I've never seen the view of Flota in this manner. Now, Flota is an important banquet hall for Chinatown, and many organizations such as CCHS uses it for its banquets, and a lot of organizations use it for its meetings, its gatherings, its annual events. So it's a very, very important space. And the lights were dimmed around this time. And as I've mentioned earlier, one of the gates of to the restaurant, which I've never seen, were these warriors. And as you can see here, there were, due to the health order, a lot of things were just shut down, and there were no telling as to when it would open up again. And these were the signs that I saw when I took pictures of the doors that didn't allow you to get into the Flota restaurant. And I happened to just wander in Chinatown Plaza, and I was able to make it up to this space. So I was very, very fortunate that I was able to capture these images and the sign. And one of the other spaces, and for those that are not familiar, is the Wong's Benevolent Society that's around Pender. It's a society clan house that belongs to the Wongs. During the health order, a lot of the activity ceased, and we were able to get access through one of the custodians there to give us access to allow us to look into, what the building was like. As you can see here, this building has no elevators. It has 4 floors. This building dates back to the early 1900s, and elevators were barely invented at that time. And there are long staircases that lead to the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th level. And I really like this picture because of the stained glass. And from the outside, if you look at just above the red car, you'll see that same stained glass from the outside. It doesn't look like much from the outside, but from the inside, it's absolutely beautiful when the light shines through it. So the halls and the staircases were empty. And here's an image at the 2nd level where a lot of the socials take place. And at this time, as you can see, the place was empty, spotless. And this is where a lot of seniors and the members gather to socialize, to talk about current events. And the hall, I'm sorry, not the hall, the clubhouse was pretty well empty. It was vacant for quite some time. If you take a look at the two newspapers that were left on one of the tables, it dates all the way back to March 22nd. And this is the newspaper, the Xingtao Daily. That's published every day in the Chinese language. And you'll see in the bottom middle section, you'll see Bonnie Henry mentioned. So this was a few days after the official date of the start of the pandemic, which we identify as the 11th. It was interesting to see these papers left there for a couple of months, and there weren't further additions beyond this one that I saw on the table. Also housing the Wang, or the WBA, is a school. Monkyang is a language school that's been here since the start of the society pretty well. And as you can see here, a lot of classrooms were not utilized. We were not allowed to gather. And you see a lot of empty desks. It's very, very quiet in the building. And one of the most impressive rooms of the WA is this hall. This hall is where the AGMs and the members of the society meet. And they probably met here at least once a month when they hold their regular meetings, but this was another gathering space. And from the outside, you would never imagine this hall space being as large as it is. You can see there's about 3-4 rows of seats and a boardroom table. And it was very, very quiet and the lights were out. So getting back out to the street, you'll see a lot of the restaurants and the gift shops in Chinatown were closed at this time. Boards went up, and not knowing when the health order be lifted, a lot of businesses put boards up on the businesses to protect the glass. And the streets were fairly quiet. So as a health order and as the ministry began to understand the pandemic a little more, things started to open up as we moved into phase 2. And this allowed the business to adapt and change the use of space that we're expecting. And one of my favorite photos of the whole time period is on Kiefer Street, there is a very hip bar called the Kiefer Bar. And typically this is a place where young people come, have drinks, and it's a very, very social place. But due to the pandemic, it was boarded up, and the seniors adapted by using the same space that's on the outside. And they took the liberty to sit and have their tea and socialize with each other. And this is something that's fairly rare. I've never seen this happen, and I had the opportunity to take a picture of it, seeing seniors sit in this space, usually young people that have, cocktails, and very expensive cocktails, I'll add. And here, a group of seniors, 2 separate groups, sat here in this space. And to give you an idea of what the Kiefer Bar, what building it's in this building. It's a heritage building. It's 4 levels. And you'll see the seniors sitting at the bottom in this space. Due to the lack of public spaces available, they utilize what was available. And these are 2 instances. I thought I would never get a glimpse of this again, but they have become regulars of this spot and returned about a week later. Now, I haven't gone back to the Kiefer Bar to see how long this prolonged, but I'm quite sure daily they would gather and have tea together. And one of the interesting things that you see here is that the boards have been, a mural was put on the board as well. You can see the changes just within a week what some of the spaces have been adapted to beautify some of these boards that are in front of glass panes that are not so pretty when they're white, but somebody painted mountains on them. The herbal, how can you go to Chinatown and not see an herbal store? Well, there's plenty of herbal stores. And what was interesting about this one is the fact that typically herbs and spices and dried mushrooms are displayed onto the sidewalks. And due to the health order, all the shopkeepers, due to lack of plexiglass, were very, very resourceful. They took what they had, they took wrap, and typically a wide open store became a tiny, tiny little hole that you see was where they allowed seniors and customers to still come and buy goods that they need, whether for the day or for the week. And you see a gentleman there shopping, and as he struggles to look at that tiny opening that's available, as opposed to before, you can walk in and pick up what you need. They were constricted to a very, very tiny hole, as you can see here. It was interesting that they still mark the plastic saying that they're still open. Please come and spend money here. And to give you an idea of how big that hole is, it's probably about 8 to 10 inches by about 3-4 feet. And that's really the only access that you had to do the transaction. And it had made shopping very, very challenging. So here's another example of another store that's smaller on Gore Street. And as you can see here, they pretty well barricaded themselves to ensure that safety measures are in place, and gathered what they could to ensure that they were protected and at the same time protecting the customers that are there. I was just very, very curious how the owners got out of this store because those pallets were not in the right direction, but they must have a secret path to get in and out. And this store was just barricaded. And this is another herb store on Kiefer. This one had a very, very wide window. So the windows would slide to give you a complete open space. But during this time, they did something similar to what the others did. So this lady was essentially trying to buy, I think it was water chestnut powder. And due to the plastic, it was very, very challenging to do a transaction. As you can see here, she's pointing her finger, she's screaming out her order. She wasn't being mean. She was just trying to get through. It was very, very tough to hear through all this plastic. And the hole was way, way at the bottom, as you can see there. As you did a transaction, they would give you a tray. So the plastic shield was a significant barrier to communication, which made it a very, very not a good experience to shop. But nevertheless, everybody were kind to each other, and ultimately they got what they needed. And here's another example of another store where they did not put plexi. They used the gate that's typically, these gates are in front of most of the stores in Chinatown. So they decided to just keep this closed while they spoke to customers. They were able to transact using the gate as opposed to, I wasn't sure whether, I didn't speak to the owners. They probably couldn't source plexiglass. And given how long this pandemic was going, they had to open up, and they were very resourceful to use what they had. Well, you wouldn't be in Chinatown without going to a barbecue house of some type. And this is a shot of, if you're familiar with the cutters, for those that have never been here, this Chinatown barbecue house is now iconic with its green and its red. And I've been a frequent patron of this place. I've never seen the seats upside down during operation hours, maybe during closing, but never permanently. So Chinatown Barbecue House focused, they reshifted their business and adapted to more of a takeout, so that you are still able to buy the barbecue meats that you need. Back to the space of Chinatown House. This is an example of the board ultimately changing to a more open fence for security. I mean, the board was really temporary until the gate was manufactured to give access. As you can see, the board there would have prevented a lot of light from getting into the space, and having the gates that you see here was much, much better for access and normalcy, if I can describe it as such. Well, there's quite a few banks in Chinatown, and I don't think lineups are all that new to banks. The only exception here, the lineups are now outside. They're not inside. And I really like this picture because you will see all different walks of life that's part of Chinatown, from the young man that's looking at his technology, to the guy who's in front, who's, I'm not sure whether he's local or not, but you see all walks of life, and you see that they're physically distanced nicely. And it's just a beautiful shot of them. And I was walking by and had to take this picture. I think it's a lot of fun. Well, there's certainly no shortage of vandalism in Chinatown. We have all seen it. With the pandemic, it has led to the word hate is a very, very strong word, and I still find it a little tough to write, but it definitely showed up in Chinatown. Here are some of the pictures that I will show you where vandalism ultimately led to hate. I wanted to share with you, some of you may not know, is that there are a lot of stewards. We call them stewards, and these are I wouldn't say custodians, but they're the stewards of Chinatown. There's a stewardship program which basically on a daily basis walk around Chinatown, find graffiti, and their job is to remove it. And what's interesting with this program is that a lot of the stewards are peer-to-peer. It's a peer-to-peer program where a lot of the guys that are working to remove graffiti know the people on the streets. They're not outsiders, they're part of the community. And they're hired to assist with graffiti removal, as well as supporting business with assisting loitering issues that are in front of their shop. So they do a lot of work that most people do not know of, and they do this every day. Pandemic, before the pandemic, during the pandemic, even now, they essentially scour the street for needles, graffiti, and assist business owners with issues that arise. And they do this without any complaints. They do a lot of good work that, as I mentioned, a lot of people don't know. And I happened to walk by one of the alleys and catch them doing this work. And sometimes they do it probably 3-4 times a day. That is the frequency of vandalism and graffiti that happens in Chinatown. And I know that's on the rise in other neighborhoods as well. But this is something that's very, very visible that you all know. As I mentioned, vandalism is a constant issue. But during the pandemic, there was a rise of anti-Asian sentiments / racism. If you look close enough, you will see on one of these walls here, bat soup was written on there. And it wasn't the traditional vandalism that you get. You usually have graffiti of people putting their names, staking out their space, but things were turning a little dark. And the good news is that that graffiti gets removed fairly quickly. Now, there's a span of a month here. In fairness, usually this type of graffitis move within a day or two, and sometimes the same day. And here you see an image of a former restaurant that was here called Rhino Fish. And this business closed before the pandemic. And a new tenant, which exists now, is called Red Beef. They make noodle soup. It's a Taiwan noodle soup, a vendor that have taken up the space. The Chinese Cultural Center, if you all remember, during the time of around late April, there was an incident that took place where vandalism turned into crime. You will see the entrance door to the David Lam space in the cultural center, where someone had decided to break the glass and create a bit of a mess, to say the least. And my photo was taken on the 6th, and this happened roughly around the end of April. And if you remember, this hit the news waves. This is the first, I would say, hate crime that took place against a building or an infrastructure that hit the news. And there are plenty of articles and on the internet, you can read up on this as well. But this was the start of some hate crimes that started to take place in Chinatown. The next incident was a defacing of the lines with racial slurs on May 19th. This occurred a couple of times. The first defacing was on May 19th. And I happened to be in Chinatown, so I was able to go down and take pictures of it very, very quickly, because I felt it was really important to capture these events so that we can have talks such as this to remember them, and also to acknowledge and also to rectify, hopefully, in the future. The second event took place on May 29th, about 10 days after the original one. The city cleaned the lines fairly quickly after the first incident, but the second one took place not too long after. And the third is the one I like the most. An anonymous person placed flowers on the lines after the cleanup. And and since then, there haven't been any other incidences that have occurred. It was really, really tough to see these lines being defaced. I'm getting a little choked up just looking at these images. It's really, really hard to look at. But I think it's important for sharing and education purposes. So beyond the violence and the crimes and the hate crimes, it is important for us to talk about resilience. Not long after the incident at the Culture Center, a group of artists came together, and part of their healing was to do a dance. And they performed, as you can see in this image here, that beautiful square. To the right of that image is where the door of where the vandalism and the broken glass took place. And they perform as a way to heal, and also as an act of solidarity and healing. And these images were not taken by me. These were that was another photographer that was at this event. It was a private event, and they did close it. And they, it's courtesy of them, and I felt it was important for us to share the positive out of what had taken place. And here are other images of, there were 2 lions under the gate. If all of you have been down to the Chinese gate, the Millennium Gate in Chinatown, there are lions on the left and the right-hand side. And this is the lions on the other side, which I didn't show earlier. And as you can see, the flowers are placed on both sides. And during this time, I'm going to take you back to the Wong's Benevolent Association. The gentleman that you see there, his name is Jeffrey. And throughout this whole pandemic, the Wongs have a long, long history, and they have a huge repository of these historical artifacts and pictures. And before the pandemic hit, he continued to do the work that he does, which is to archive and digitize these. And his goal is really to bring some of this history back to life. And at some point, we're going to see the output of this from various organizations that there'll be a lot of good material that talks about the history of that association. And most of these associations are fairly closed. We unless you're a member of it, we really, don't know what happens in these society houses. But I can tell you that there are a lot of work that they do with the community, with its members and its outreach programs. And I'm very much looking forward to when some of this hits the public realm. Other forms of resiliencies, it's a organization called Chinatown Today. Chinatown Today is a non-profit organization, and their goal is really to share stories from Chinatown's past, present, and future. And they help gather and document. And during this time, during the pandemic, they were working on what is called Volume 3, and it is a volume on Chinatown stories. And it's all about different stories of individuals within Chinatown, whether you're a business owner or you are a nonprofit organization. It's a book that tells many, many stories of people in Chinatown and that are associated with that do work. And it's a wonderful publication. And I encourage you to pick up a copy if you haven't, if you have never seen this publication. It's a really well-written magazine. So throughout the course of the first and second phase, I think I'd be remiss to say that there weren't any losses. We saw in the Chinatown Plaza, a lot of businesses during May, lights were pretty dim inside the plaza, which is usually full of activity. You see people walking in and out. A lot of these shops have not reopened. I don't know how many were lost, but I can tell you just visibly, a lot of these stores, once they were shut, they never opened up again. And it was really, really tough to see. But that was the reality of this pandemic. But there were some businesses that did survive, and they're still here today. So the vandalism that occurred and the hate crime that occurred resulted in the loss of public space. As you can see here, the entrance to the courtyard, that is no longer open anymore. That was a temporary gate. There's a permanent gate that's in front of the cultural center now. And it's really sad to lose public space due to the act of a few that have, really destroyed the freedoms that we have to enjoy this space. And to have and see these gates in front of the entrance to the cultural center was really, really tough to see. And here's an image of it looking straight at the gardens and through the courtyard. And one of the other major losses, if you are a frequent patron of Goldstone Restaurant, it is a diner in Chinatown. I don't know of anyone who spends time in Chinatown not having spent some time in this diner, whether it's for meetings, gatherings, birthdays. It was an institution. Throughout the pandemic, we were all hoping and wondering when Goldstone was going to reopen. Goldstone has not. This restaurant's been, I think, in the Chinatown area for since the 80s. I don't know the exact date. This restaurant has not recovered and is not reopened. Well, with darkness always comes light. And with that in mind, one of the businesses that have been in Chinatown for quite some time is a company called Treasure Green. And Olivia's here today to tell us a little bit more, so I won't steal too much of her thunder, but I want to share that they are a legacy business, and they're one of the few businesses that reopened when it was time to reopen. And during May, you will see that they opened and they still provided beverages and tea. Whoever wanted to buy and source tea, you were able to do so. You can pick up through the window. Like many other stores, you were able to pick up what you need to. And the picture on the right is they had gone through a major renovation during the time of the pandemic. And Olivia will probably share with us why she chose to do that a little bit later on. And she has changed her space quite a bit. And as you can see there, they've gone web savvy. So they've gone online. This allows people to continue to source tea from them. And there she's doing likely some sort of a cast or podcast to really announce to the public that she's there. She's able to offer services and also teach you a little bit about tea if you don't know anything about tea. And if you spend any time in Chinatown, Phnom Penh is one of the other institutions that's on Georgia Street. They're known for their fried chicken wings, and to be closed as long as they were, they ultimately did open. And as you can see here, kids, adults, people of all ages lined up for their reopening. And we were all very, very excited to be able to get the food that we all love from Phnom Penh on East Georgia. And one of the probably lesser known vendors, depending on where you shop in Chinatown, is an Italian food specialist store. There's Angelo. He's been in this location, I think, since he was a young man. He has, throughout this pandemic, I checked in on him a few times. I don't remember him being closed. And if anybody knows Toasties, you would know that their business, even prior to the pandemic, was not a big store. You always had to ring this bell at his door. He often took breaks. He's out sweeping the street in front of him, in front of his store. I would say that he was pandemic ready before the pandemic even showed up. And I don't think he really missed a beat. And if he was not there, he's likely at a doctor's appointment somewhere where he's not at his shop. But I'm quite certain he was open throughout the whole pandemic, which I cannot confirm, but I'm quite sure he was. And dim sum. Oh boy, finally we can have dim sum. Flota is one of the largest restaurants, as I mentioned earlier, in Chinatown. And it's this image captures, if you've been in Florida, usually you don't see carpet. And it was a little bit surreal to see more carpet than there are tables. And they're all spaced out for the right reasons because of health orders. And I was happy to be in Florida during their reopening on June 1. Oh, sorry guys, I'm just having a little bit of difficulty moving the next slide. We're almost near the end. So you will see that some of the restaurants have begun to open up again in May, June timeframe. And here was a community effort. You can see Connie there, I think giving guidance to the crew that was removing the boards off the windows. And for those of you not familiar with Bamboo Village, they're right next to Jade Dynasty. And they did something different. They created a bit of an oasis right in the heart of Chinatown. They had their plants. They've really switched their gears to have a lot more organics and sell a lot of plants. And they've dressed up the street beautifully. I mean, I almost don't recognize it looking at it this way. It's just a wonderful, green image of Chinatown. It's wonderful to see. And if you remember this image that I showed you earlier, when everything was boarded up, things changed pretty quickly. As the boards came down, businesses came back on stream, and everybody was ready to do business. And Newtown, well, definitely expecting a lineup, and they had one when they reopened back in May. And one of the other iconic spaces in Chinatown is the Dr. Sun Yat-sen Classical Chinese Garden, and they reopened. And what was unusual with this is the fact that they're using an entrance that they don't typically use. The garden typically uses their entrance via the Carroll Street, which is probably, if you've been there last, or familiar with the alcove through the courtyard. And due to health orders, they've decided to use this door that's this moon gate right on Kiefer Street. And it was really nice to see. I've always seen this door. I've never seen it open. It was really nice to see this moon gate opened up, and it's very, very beautiful. And the street scene was just fabulous. That said, even though the pandemic was really hard, it was very isolating, there were some major births that took place, and one of them being the first Chinese Canadian museum that launched its exhibition. As you can see on the left is an image that I took around June, and they did a lot of construction between June and August, and they opened an exhibition there for all to participate. It is a free museum that you can go to. You just have to book, and you're able to see this beautiful space that have a lot of stories of a lot of immigrant families that have come to Canada. And I encourage, if you have never been to the museum, certainly do go. It's a wonderful space to learn, to have conversations, and learn a little bit of history. And here's the entrance. It's a lovely entrance. This is built right on, it's a heritage building. It's a Hansen building. And it's one of the heritage buildings in Chinatown. They occupy the first level. And here's a look at the exhibition called A Seat at the Table, about Chinese immigration and British Columbia. That said, I wanted to share with you the most important part of this presentation and retrospective is the connections that a lot of organizations made during the pandemic. Here is an example of one. This is a Bao Bei restaurant on Kiefer. It was a staging area for weekly grocery packages that were delivered. These were important because we couldn't just buy regular groceries. A lot of the seniors are Chinese, and they delivered culturally appropriate vegetables for them so that they're able to cook at home. And if they didn't, optional cooked meals were provided to the seniors of Chinatown. So a group of young people helping seniors. It was wonderful to see the various organizations that got together to help each other. It allowed the restaurants to stay busy so that they don't go bankrupt. They were able to pivot to keep themselves busy and at the same time help groups in Chinatown. And another is the Youth Collaborative. Started a supper club, and on a weekly basis, they would take orders or donations from the public and buy meals in Chinatown, again, keeping the restaurants busy. and deliver these foods to the customers. And it allowed everybody to benefit from each other and keeping things and supporting everything local. And here's another example of Jade Dynasty helping provide meals for the Meiwa. Meiwa is a senior resident that is managed by the Chinatown Foundation. Here you see 2-3 organizations coming together to help each other, to keep restaurants busy, to get meals to where it's needed, and really form those connections and helping seniors stay safe so that they're able to stay at home. And I believe the city of Vancouver also assisted as well. And I don't know all the facts, but this is what I understand. And the other is the Chinese Canadian Historical Society supported a legacy business. That's a tailor shop that's over 100 years old, and pivot from making beautiful suits to masks, to have protective equipment. So CCHS organized a program calling out for the public and members to donate masks, to the First Nations, as well as to the public, and whoever wants to buy it supports a local business. Instead of buying something from Amazon, you're supporting local businesses. I wanted to pay a little bit of homage to our late Bill Wong, who was his family had owned modernized tailors for well over 100 years. And ultimately, this was passed on to Mia Wu, who's now the owner of Modernize. And I wanted to mention Bill is also an honoree of our society back in 2016. Oops, I advanced a little too quickly here. Oh, I must apologize. This was one of my last slides and I ran out of time, but I wanted to share with you one of the legacy businesses in Chinatown also went through a bit of a metamorphosis and transformation. And this will be told at a future, hopefully a future presentation where I'll tell you a little bit more. But this is one of the businesses that serve fresh dim sum as well as provide frozen. And Kamwai was a business that went from one generation to another during the pandemic. And I will leave it at that so that we have more to talk about in the future. But aside from that, I've taken enough of your time. I want to thank you very much for sitting in on this retrospective. It has been a lot of fun to do. I learned a lot, and it was very much insightful for me to learn about Chinatown during a very, very tough period that we went through. And we're certainly not out of the woods, but the amount of connections that have been made during this time has just, I'm speechless to see the amount of community at work. Chinatown was certainly at its best when it needed to be. Aside from that, I will leave it there. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Larry. That was quite fabulous and really, really great photographs. And I've been lucky to see some of these at some of our meetings, and I saw the advance preview a couple days ago, and that's really great. So thank you. These were really, really fabulous images. Sarah, do you have a few words?
Yes, Larry, that was a wonderful presentation. And I think I'm sure there are many people eager to ask you questions about your experience during the past year, which has been an incredible archive. And I think it's going to be very much appreciated even as we move further out and beyond the pandemic.
Yep.
So I'm going to ask John to lead this next portion where we have the opportunity to chat with both Larry and Olivia, who's, if you missed it earlier, is sitting at our shop as we speak at Treasure Green Tea. But we'll get John to start off the conversation, but then we'll invite the rest of you to join in. If you would like to ask a question, we invite you to use the chat box or you can also raise your hand to ask directly. But over to you, John.
Okay, thank you. So one of the things that we wanted to do with this evening was to look at Larry's pictures and I think the sequencing of, you know, the real sort of, whoops, everything's closed, what's going to happen to the reopening, and I think the activity on the street, as well as what was really great, and Larry mentioned it, was the coming together of different organizations and groups and things to really assist. And the number of different groups that were doing food programs for the seniors in Chinatown and elsewhere was really quite something. You mentioned the city of Vancouver assisting, and we were very happy at the Chinese Garden to be able to assist in the transfer of funds from the city to a number of community groups and things that for the food programs. And so I think that was one of the really nice outcomes of this, was that coming together and that real sense of community with the capital C. And then I think it's interesting to watch businesses come back. There's old friends. I mean, I was so happy when Jade Dynasty opened because I miss their lemon chicken. And, you know, and I was not the first in line, but I was probably third or fourth at Phnom Penh for spice. I don't care about their chicken wings. It's the spicy garlic squid. That's the killer dish for me. So we have those coming back, and we have some new places, but we have also the reinvention of places. And I think that's also what's interesting. And so that's why we have Olivia from Treasure Green Tea. It's a great place to shop for tea. And it's been, I haven't been into the new store, but as I walk by, I keep peering in and looking at the changes, and it is a very striking transformation. So what I did want to ask Olivia was, the transformation, I think, was time to reinvent myself because the store's closed, or I need to reinvent myself because we've got to come out of the pandemic. What was the impetus for the renovation, first off?
First of all, you know what? I have a fetish of moving furnitures. That's my fetish. And I do it at home, but honestly, I believe giving a fresh look, a nice look, is always very refreshing for our guests and friends. So I do that regularly in our store, either moving a big block of furniture to another space, or just, you know, the notion of giving a new look and feel, oh wow, this is new type of feeling. Is this personal? I'm like that, even personally or at work. And I had, because we are coming to our 40th anniversary, we're turning 40. So that was my plan anyways. And because of the pandemic, the pandemic had actually just pushed it a little earlier. My plan was for March at this time of the year, actually. But because of the pandemic, I thought, hey, why don't we just take this opportunity and do it? So it happened.
Okay.
And we did the renovation in, if I can remember correctly, it was in July. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, June, July.
And for your business, which generally relies on, I think, people walking in off the street to pick your brains and expertise on what teas to buy and things, how was the experience of the shop in the time period that Larry covered, sort of from the closing of things in March of last year to, say, last week? Like, how's it been?
Very blessed. We are regarded as, well, our guests been telling us, oh my God, I'm glad you're open, and regarded as essential goods because it's their staple at home. So they come in, and even at the door, when we just do pick up an order at the door, and people just like, oh my God, I'm so glad you're open. I need my tea. It keeps me going. It gives me at a sanity level, and I'm just like so pleased when I hear that. And you know, when I heard that we in March that we're going to be closed, I thought, okay, Olivia, time to take a break. That's exactly what I had in my head. And I said, I plan, oh, what I'm going to do. I'm going to have my cooking book. I'm going to learn this, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden, oh, my order came in, people calling me, hey, can I pick this up at this time? So I end up coming in longer days than I used to, which is not a complaint. I'm happy I was part of people's life. I'm happy that I actually did goods for my guests and clients because they needed it. It's just not, you know, in a point, at some point that you realize, hey, this is no longer just a business. It's not a ka-ching. It's really, I felt that I was doing something. So I was saying, hey, how are you feeling? I have this tea. Perhaps, you know, I'm giving a lot of samples like, oh, hey, try this. This will calm you down. Have this in the morning. It was just fascinating. The whole journey was just like no others. It was just amazing. Yeah.
Okay. That's kind of cool, actually. You become
It is.
an essential service then in it.
Yes,
really.
I didn't know that. I was ready to rest. I would say, okay, let's look into other avenues and how can I get some help from the government? I was looking at all different things. And also I'm like, oh, okay, I'm there 7 days a week and I cannot keep up. It's not, again, I want to stress the point that I'm not just like, it's not ka-ching. I feel honored when people say, your tea helped me. I feel good. I feel calm. And that's what really kept me going.
Okay. That's interesting. Now you were part of the Chinatown Foundation's Gifts from Chinatown program, weren't you?
Yeah, very honored to be. Yeah, it was this wonderful, wonderful experience. So they approached me and say, hey, I want to promote some of your product and to be on their website for Christmas. And of course, I've been in Chinatown for a long time. We've been here for 40 years. And I thought, oh, okay, thank you. And you know what? They delivered it. They were very on top of it. They had a good system going. Most importantly, I felt the love. I felt the unity. I felt people were together. They were sort of like, hey, I help you do this. Let's do it. And it happened, blum, blum, blum. It just rolled. It just happened. Everything just happened in very good manner and good system.
Good. And so that program probably will have legs and come back and continue, I would presume.
Hopefully, yes. Well, I also want to take this opportunity to mention that I was also approached by Elisa Yang. She is an artist in China. She's a Chinese artist, I should say. She created some tote bags. They drew the design, they printed the tote bags. And she approached me, hey, I'm going to sell tote bags. Do you want to be in my, the initiative is to raise fund for the Chinatown businesses. And they said, if I want to be in it, I said, oh yes, that will be lovely. So she sold quite a bit of tote bags, and some of the fund that she would transfer into gift cards and to bring people into our shop. You know what? Initiatives like those are just so beautiful. I honestly never thought that would happen. When they approached me, I just like, oh yes, please. But it's so successful, and it's not just the success is one thing, very good, but also it's the love, the care, is the blood and soul they want to put into the community to promote and to help the other, the community, the whole community, the businesses, and that what also a big part of what makes the community, right? So it's just unbelievably loved that I feel all these years that I've been in Chinatown. And I've
That's-
shared that with Sarah in different ways. That I just
Mhm.
feel very loved. I'm full of little
That's really-
hearts in my head right now.
That's really nice to hear, because I think we often, working and being in Chinatown so often, and then talking to people about Chinatown, we often hear the doom and gloom side of it, and I'm tired of hearing commentators on television or radio talk about the death of Chinatown and things, because there is a lot of life in the neighborhood, and we have that sense of community, and I think it really did come through in this past year. And I know the Chinese Canadian Historical Society's own experience, Larry touched on it with Modernized Taylor. We, thought we would do the mask thing, and that red color was exclusive to the society, which was kind of cool. And we did have that partnership thing of buying masks and then having the opportunity to donate to one of the nations that we had chosen. But we were knocked off our socks by how many masks we sold. I mean, I think we wore out her sewing machine at the shop, because people really responded to that type of thing, and in part because it was modernizing a legacy business and helping them out. And so I think that really has carried through in this whole period, that real support for the businesses and things. The one other thing I wanted to ask you about, though, was because you've got a couple of initiatives that you're working on, and I'm looking off my notes here now. You're doing your virtual tastings, and I guess moved into, as everyone else has, the virtual shopping experience. I guess that's taking up more of your time. And is it working?
Well, we've been online and have an online presence since over 15 years.
Okay.
But honestly, during the time when the street were really quiet, I had that sense of, I'm missing my guests. I'm missing my friends. Customer turned to my guests, turned into my friends, and I miss them. And I thought, what can I do to keep us, or keep the community, keep the tea community, or the community united together and connected? And that's the one thing I thought of. And so I thought, okay, let's do virtual tasting. Let's do virtual communication. It wasn't a business concept. It was, you can just book 15 minutes online. We talk, we have some tea, we just laugh, we talk about, what's going on with you? We just do that. And I just want to keep that connection going. And that's what tea does. It connects people. And that's part of my thing. So I just wanted to do that. And it was very important to me. I'm not just helping my guests, I'm helping myself, really. I need to be connected too. I don't want to pack a box, put a label on it, and put it to a post office. I want people to say, I want to see people's face. I see, what are you tasting? Are you tasting that? Are you getting that aftertaste? Things like that is very important to me as well. We are literally bonding virtually, and that's what I was trying to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting, and I think when you think about tastings and things like that online, it's like, really? But my wife and I, we did a cheese tasting a while back from our cheese.
Oh,
and
lovely.
The cheese shop over here on Hastings Street, you came in, you bought the cheese and you brought it home, and then you signed on to Zoom, and they had recommended wines, and then they ran through all the cheeses, and it was just so much fun.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't expect that sort of thing to work. So, but that community, then, that sense of community expands beyond your normal channels and things.
Right. And also, I guess when you are doing the virtual tasting, it's what do you have in your head? Am I trying to sell you something, or am I trying to just coach you, to guide you to taste and be connected in that sense? Completely two different platforms we're on, right? So mine is, you connected with me, I'm connected with you, and I feel that bond as well as you do, and that's exactly what I'm doing, and that just feels great.
That's
Cute.
kind of cool. So,
So to interrupt really quickly as we're on that note, our audience had a question. So compared to the total lockdown you experienced a year ago, and Olivia, how would you describe the reopening of the Chinatown community now, as we're now in the middle of March 2021? You know, how do you feel Chinatown is in the sense of business?
Chinatown is actually, to me, by visual, looking outside, is very normal to me, except people now have a mask on. I don't feel there's less traffic. I don't feel there's more either. So they're very normal at visually. For my visually on the street, if you, in terms of talking about business, I think some of my business have shifted online. I guess that has to do with the comfort, how comfortable people are being outside and being in a, you know, enclosed environment.
Okay. And so there's a question for Larry here, and it's interesting. Is what connections did you make, or did you make any connections personally while you were out there taking some of the photographs during this time period?
Excellent question. Thank you very much for asking it. I would say that I feel very blessed because what I did during that time period, I made a lot of new friends. For example, the folks at Bamboo Village, and even reconnecting with Olivia. I think I made a lot of new friends that I wouldn't have otherwise had I not done this. And I think I'm much better for it because at the same time, I had a unique perspective that I saw all these connections. I was able to draw lines with all the dots on my page when everybody else may have been just worried about their own, you know, they're hunkered down doing what they need to sustain themselves to get through this period. I was able to see all these organizations connecting. And that's a very, very, I feel very blessed to see those connections because ultimately it gave you a lot of faith in you know, we can get out of this, and all those positive things happening does something to your psyche. I think it helps your mental wellness. It helps all types of areas, and to have the ability or doing this project allowed me to see those things, and it really helped sustain me throughout this period. So I'm very, very blessed.
That's interesting. Oh shoot, I had a question that just left my head. I hate stuff like that. Oh, it's going to be for, oh well. You did have, I'll just change things. You had the shot of the dim sum shop that they were still in their process of renovation, and they've now opened. And you know, you talked about the generational shift, and it's one of the things we often worry about in Chinatown is sort of, you know, the generational shift is, oh, he's a lawyer, he doesn't want the barbecue meat shop, so what do I do? And we see the closures and things like that. But here has been a very successful transition in terms of taking over the business, and then a little bit of change up in terms of new graphic design, a little bit of shop redesign and things like that. So I'm just thinking that this is kind of almost a roadmap for the future in terms of how we talk a lot about legacy business, but we don't really know in many ways how to keep them going. And so Olivia's sort of, I guess, penchant for furniture moving is one
Well,
A
thing.
little bit more than that.
Yeah, I think you brought up some really good examples, John. Yeah.
And then the reinvention.
Yeah.
So as a path forward, I guess.
May I comment on that? If I
Yeah,
may?
please do.
Because I think you cited an example where there's a generation shift, right? You pass it on down the family. And I will mention Modernize, for example, is another legacy business that didn't, Mia's not part of the family, but she was entrusted to take over the business. So there are also success stories where you don't have ties by blood, by family. So, other examples can work as well. I think so long as you appreciate and understand the business, know its legacy, the next, I guess, owners or custodians of that business can take it and modernize or bring it up to date because times change.
Yeah.
And Chemway is a perfect example of the next generation updating it, doing it what it needs to be attractive to customers without losing its core, I guess, base. Because for as far as I can see, I shop there and prices haven't changed all that much. They stay true to who they are with some updates.
And it's interesting to see the customer base too has changed with the addition of new customers, but not the loss of the traditional customers.
Yes.
So it hasn't been made uncomfortable, I guess, for folks that are used to be there.
Yeah.
And so for the future of the tea shop, like you're only been there for 40 years, so you've probably got a while to go. But what's the sort of, I don't know, what do you see for the future, the long range future of something like your business, Olivia?
Well, actually, I've been in the business actually as long as my father, actually. I was a little kid. I can see the lines on my eyes here. Anyways, I am super proud to be a 40 years old business. And we see the change, we accept the change, and we embrace the change. So in some cases, I'll say I'm actually ahead of the change a little bit. And that's why you see me moving furniture all the time, not just in this space, also virtually. I just see that in the future is that besides keeping the heritage of my family business, I want to do a little bit even better and more at the educational part of the culture of Chinese culture in tea. For example, tea is not only just a healthy choice of beverage. It's also, there's a lot of meaning behind it. We serve tea because we want to be accepted. The person accept a cup of tea, accepting your service, accepting you as their friend or whatever the occasion is. Serving tea as a newcomer to the family, the in-laws accepting that cup of tea, meaning I'm accepting you into the family. Those culture, those meanings are also beyond just sipping and say, oh, wow, that tastes good. It's just so much more. And I want to bring that alive, bring that to people to understand that this is more than just sipping, more than just health. There's so much you can do with a cup of tea without speaking, without saying a word, and it's understood. It's a language on its own. And those needs to be educated and how to, then apart from how to choose a tea, how to all that, those would be also part of it, of course. But that's besides this business, I want to be also a lot more of educational to our broad clientele, guests, friends. And that's my, that's what I'm, and of course, we're looking forward to sharing our 50th silver anniversary with everyone. Another 10 years.
Excellent. And Larry, as we wrap up here, you've photographed for a period of time that was very important to Chinatown, but I'm presuming that you're carrying on with the photography and documenting things today as things open and change and progress.
Good question, John. I have never put my camera down, actually. I would
Good.
say that
Okay.
when this project came up, the intensity was very, very high. But I do carry, I mean, we all carry phones and things like that, but I do carry a camera on my hip. That's who I am. And
Good.
as much as
Yeah.
Olivia loves tea, as much as I love photography, it's just in
Great.
my blood. So I hope to continue to do what I really enjoy doing, is really capturing these and sharing stories.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to have your pictures for this evening. Olivia, really great to have you and talk about
My
just how
pleasure.
you've come through things. I'm going to throw it back to Sarah. We've got a few announcements and things before we say goodnight. So Sarah?
Thank you, John. I really enjoyed that conversation you led. So thank you, Larry and Olivia, for sharing more insight into your experience. I'm going to ask Larry to bring our announcement slides up, just wearing your other hat. If you enjoyed this talk, we're always finding ways to share more about the history and ongoing history of Chinatown. So we do have publications available. One of them being Chinatown Through a Wide Lens, The Hidden Photographs of Yu Cho Chow, and that is by our board member, Catherine Clement. So that's a very stunning publication that she worked on for close to a decade, capturing the different communities in Chinatown and how they work together. And we also wanted to mention that it's the 10th anniversary since we published Dim Sum Stories, A Chinatown Childhood by Larry Wong, who is one of our former board directors. So if you didn't get a copy, we have a very limited print that's now available. And we encourage you to continue exploring the layers of history in this rich neighborhood. We also have an exciting event coming up on April the 10th, and we are very excited to bring in Paul Yee. He was selected as our annual honoree last year in 2020. But as many of you know, it was the first time we had to cancel our annual banquet, which is a highlight of the year. But nevertheless, we're inviting him back for somewhat of a virtual celebration and a talk, and he will be bringing us back in time. You can see this throwback photo of when he curated the exhibition Saltwater City back in 1986 at the Chinese Cultural Center, which in many ways is a precursor to what we see now emerging with the Chinese Canadian Museum's efforts. So we're very excited to bring in Paul Yee, who's a very prolific writer and historian. And many of you may have heard of the publication he did as well, called Saltwater City. So please stay tuned for that. We'll be releasing tickets for that very shortly. Cool. And before we let you go, we did want to take a moment to acknowledge the passing of the late Colonel Hao Lee. And this happened quite suddenly this past week. But Colonel Lee is no stranger to many of us in the community. He was a founding member of the Chinese Canadian Military Museum and really put this organization together at a time when there was actually resistance and veterans didn't necessarily see themselves as being worthy of being remembered in that way. So he was a pioneer in many regards, but he was also a founding director of our society, the Chinese Canadian Historical Society. And as my fellow colleagues who've known Hao much longer than I have told me, he officiated our annual general meetings for as long as we can remember with his very loud, booming voice, and really commanded the attention in the room. So we will certainly miss Colonel Lee's generosity to the community. He was a mentor, especially to youth, and was formerly a public school teacher in the Burnaby district. But at least we treasured those moments from the banquet in 2019 when he was our honoree as well. So we just wanted to take that moment and acknowledge the passing of Hal, but also sadly many elders who have passed during this time of isolation, and we haven't been able to connect with them. But thank you all for taking the time to join us this evening. It's as all of you have said, really been a time of creating connections, and we hope you've made some new connections yourself during this talk, and we'll continue to stay in touch with each other and try some of Olivia's tea as well.